In this video, I'm demonstrating the first half of the floor postures of the Yoga Synergy water sequence that was developed by myself and fellow physiotherapist Bianca Machliss at Yoga Synergy. You see here it begins with me beginning in a headstand, which for most people we don't recommend. And notice that when I first lifted up into it, I even lifted my head off the floor, suggesting I'm taking a lot of weight on my arms. As I'm moving like this in a smooth circular way, flexing and extending my hips while rotating, most of my weight's on my arms. As I hold my heel in this position, I'm resisting. I'm pulling with my arm but resisting with my foot, twisting my spine in a way that the pubic bone moves to one direction and my navel moves in the opposite direction. So the movements that resist the arms against the leg actually resist from the core, and I breathe into the space between the pubic bone and the navel. When I put my legs into a lotus posture, notice it's an active movement. Notice I can either do it slow or fast, but I'm not using other limbs to put my legs into lotus. To come out of the pose, I choose to use Mayurasana, and this is something which I can come back into the posture with, lowering onto my arms, when my abdomen is completely relaxed, and simply breathing into the abdomen, I can lift back up into the headstand. This sequence here is now a headstand releasing sequence that Bianca and I developed, which uses a breath control system of expanding the back and the front of the body to lengthen the back and the front of the body in a series of forward bending positions. The particularly most useful one is this last one, where the hands are interlocked behind the back and you keep the shoulder blades together, which would normally cause shoulder or spinal extension, but actually then you're actually trying to flex the spine while extending the neck, and this can really relieve the neck and upper back. Notice in this forward bend how my head is on my knee without pulling. I don't recommend pulling against your heels or your legs in a forward bend unless you can actually put your head on the knee without stretching. To try and stretch and then pull against your legs in a forward bend is potentially dangerous. This is a simple version of Bunterastan, which I keep my knees bent. It's a lot easier, but legs straight is a lot more challenging for most people, and often that will cause lower back pain. Not recommended for most people. Now I'm doing Janushi Assassin, and notice how I actively moved into the pose, lifting my leg in with my leg rather than pulling it with my hands. Notice I'm pulling against my left leg and actually dorsiflexing the leg, and that tensions nerves and acupuncture meridians. Now when I twist, notice it was an active twist, and twisting from that position, I come actively into an arm balance. And the arm balance, I'm actually pushing my left leg to the left from my navel while expanding my belly, chest, throat upwards. So you resist again from the core to lift you off the ground. It gives you more power to lift up off the ground. Now I link to this sideways bending position called Paragastan. It's a very, very lovely position, and then come from that to a twisting position. These practices are highly linked, and you move from one side to the next quite effortlessly. And obviously if you haven't got the flexibility, fluid movements like this will not help you at all. This is a very difficult version of Supta Vira Paragastan. So I'm actually lengthening very strongly the stomach meridian in the right leg and the rectus femoris and things like the psoas. Now I twist actively to come in what's called Butterworth, and using an external rotation of the shoulders first, then an internal rotation allows me to take my arm back much further. Now I come out of the posture, moving from my core, and twist in the opposite direction. And this is a very difficult bind. Notice how much I open the back and the front of my body to reach the arm back to grab the ankle. It really helps if you move from the core, from the spine, and then move your shoulder blades to wrap and bind. Otherwise, you risk damaging your shoulder. Now I'm going to twist again to the left, and now I do a version of Parshvakukutasana, which is quite challenging but much easier to do than having it with both legs, so it looks quite effective. And now I lean from there onto one leg and have it go, just lifting up one hand with the left elbow balancing on the abdomen, soft abdomen. This is Lotus. It's like a half sit-up but balancing on the arms. I could do a full up dog, but instead I choose something where I pull with my arms and use my back muscles to lift up. And then I come back via plank position, rounding the back to come to a downward facing dog, and then float back through. I'm turning so you can see what I'm doing here, and I'm coming into Paragastan with the soles of feet together, knees apart. I try and go deeper into the posture, not trying to force the legs down, but rather trying to pull the knees wider. Then I come to what's called Bunterastan, where I rest the pelvic floor on the heels, and now I'm rolling my transverse abdominis, and in a way beginning to hyperventilate. Now I'm pumping my oblique abdominal muscles, and now I'm rolling my whole trunk, and then I'm going to expand and contract my chest. All of this leads to some hyperventilation, and I'm going to follow this with hypoventilation, meaning I'm breathing less. So now I'm holding my breath out and pumping my rectus abdominis with my oblique muscles while holding the breath out and expanding the chest like breathing Uddiyana Bandha. I've inhaled and now I'm holding the breath in. With the breath held in, I stretch my tongue to my chin and back to my back of my throat to stretch the tongue. And all these movements of my jaw and face you see me doing now, including this arm movement, which includes forward bending, sideways, backward twisting, is all done on a breath retention. Now that increases intra-abdominal, intrathoracic pressure, and I'm using my tongue to prevent the pressure from becoming intracranial pressure. Now I exhale fully and hold the breath out and do Nauli and Lauliki, which is holding the breath out while rolling the abdomen using a combination of oblique muscles. Notice I came out of the pose in a version of Mayurasana, and now I jump back through to come to begin my next posture, which is a simple version of Navasana to a more complex version, the boat posture. Notice I'm moving my fingers, and this helps ensure that I'm relaxed. Now I interlock my fingers around my feet, and I grip toes against feet and fingers against toes and toes against fingers, and I actually pull my hands outwards and push my feet against my hands, offering resistance. This I can also do in a Lotus posture, and from here I lift up, perhaps into a handstand, or just perhaps a little bit off the floor, and then I come back into an active Lotus position and do the same thing in a Lotus position. Most people it's better off doing this exercise without Lotus, but if you can, it's fun. I choose to use a Lotus position. This is obviously not a beginner practice. This is a fun practice that I enjoy doing, when there's the energy and the flexibility to do it. Again, I come to Navasana and Ardha Navasana, half sit up, where I'm using a lot more rectus abdominis. When you're fully sitting up, you use more of the hip flexor muscles, which is not good to do if your hips are a bit sore. Then again, I come to a simple push-up, a full push-up and a plank, and I'm experimenting with the pulling action and the back extensor action. I round my back out before coming back to the downward facing dog pose. Next posture, I move actively to lift up my left thigh over my left shoulder. Notice my right knee is bent to do that. Then from there I lift into the air and take the leg back behind me for Ekapada Kundinyasana. Again, I do the same thing on the opposite side, bending the knees first, coming back to a simple vinyasa movement with the up dog, down dog, using my elbows to pull, rounding out my lower back before I come back to the downward facing dog pose. It's easier if you put your knees on the floor with that. Looks like I'm only doing one side of this. It's a demonstration. I'm not actually trying to do a practice here. And now I come into a deep lunge where I'm twisting my navel to the left as my thighs turned out to the right, and I stand and do what is a very effective psoas lengthening activity. It's a forward bend of the spine with a side bend, and notice I come on the top of the left foot, which adds an extra challenge. Then I come back up and I massage my internal organs, breathing into a soft abdomen, which is enough for most people to stay there. But what I'm going to do now is place my left elbow into the abdomen and actually sink my whole body weight against the left elbow on the abdomen, and I completely relax. And lifting up one limb at a time, eventually I lift the whole body up in the air and balance on my left elbow on the abdomen. I'm going to do the second side. So when I come into the deep lunge, I'm stimulating my kidney from the back in a twist. Now I stimulate the kidney from the right side in a twist. And now when I come into the Mayurasana, the one-armed balance, first of all with my fingers, I stimulate the front of the kidney, pressing through the psoas into the kidney and balance on one arm. This is a very, very good practice for manipulating the internal organs.